principle that we're going to talk about is systematic waste elimination. Now, it's hard to take any course on lean and not learn about the 7 wastes. They're prevalent in almost every book and every course that you would take, but it's not really just about the 7 wastes. It's ultimately about the behavior that you attached to the 7 wastes. Now, what that really means is that when you find waste, you are compelled to act. Now, whether you have the full authority and ability to eliminate every waste you come across, that's a secondary concern. But do you observe waste, do you see waste, and just move on and assume it's someone else's problem? Assume that there's plenty of waste to go around, so why work on it today? But when you find waste, you are compelled to act. And ultimately, that's the driving behavior of this principle. So the words systematic waste elimination are important. The first part of that is that we really want to identify and eliminate waste. The goal is not just to identify waste in our organization and learn what waste is. That really actually in the end just makes us more frustrated with what's around us. Our goal ultimately is to identify and eliminate. Now, the systematic part of that is that you need some method behind that. Now, I don't care if you put a whiteboard up in the corner and people write on it as they find waste, or you develop or install a software system where you can capture it and catalog it and share it. But fundamentally, you need some kind of system, some deliberate way in which people can capture, prioritize, and then do something about the waste that they find. Now, as you think about what that systematic approach is, it's also important that it be waste-free. If it's harder to do something about the waste than it is to live with the waste, then you're not going to get a whole lot of eliminating waste. It has to be easy for someone to do something about the waste that they find. You also have to think about the waste that somebody might experience, but they don't own. There's plenty of waste in our organization that might be broadly owned. For example, our behaviors around emails. How do we make that visible? Who do we make it visible to? All has to be part of that systematic approach. So systematic waste elimination is more than just teaching people what the 7 wastes are. It's about having a systematic approach to identify and eliminate that waste. So we're going to talk about the 7 types of waste. Now, why this is important is that it provides us a lens and a language to see and talk about waste. Now, what I mean by a lens is that words have a powerful way to help our brain see things, see details, discern one thing from the next that we wouldn't otherwise be able to see. The words actually create a framework for our brain to see it. So if you go deep in any practice, whether it's sports or fishing or accounting, the words help discern details from one another and provides the ability to see things in greater detail. So that's how it provides a lens. Now, as a language, it's also powerful to bind us together across the organization to have a common understanding. And so, operations people have their own common language, and finance people have their language, and sales people have their language. But waste can be a common language across those disciplines so that we can collaborate and share ideas and share problems and ultimately work together to drive waste out throughout our organization. So having that lens and language becomes very important as a common basis across our company. We won't spend a lot of time on the 7 types of waste, but since it is a common lens and language, we should understand what those 7 wastes are. Now, as I go through them, I'll share some examples perhaps from product development, which is a harder place to imagine how these wastes show up, rather than production, which is an environment where it's much easier to observe them. Now, we often use the analogy Tim would. These letters spell out the 7 types of waste, and we'll go through each one and provide an example. So T stands for transportation. This is any excess movement of materials or information. So again, on the factory floor, this could be picking up materials more often than you need to or moving them greater distances. In product development, it might be prototype parts or even information that has to go from location to location, which slows down the process and adds a whole lot of extra steps and waiting before you can actually get what you need to test coming out of the process. I stands for inventory. Again, in production, this could be raw materials, work in process, or finished goods. In product development, it might be something like excess projects. Starting 10 projects when we really only need 5 to come out the other end. Worked with one organization that continued to find reasons to start new projects. And as a result, they had tons of projects that were work in process. So we put a limit, a whip limit on their projects, and no engineer was allowed to work on more than 2 projects at a time. This meant that you couldn't start new projects until something else was finished. And it actually allowed marketing to be much more clear about what they really wanted to prioritize starting, because they couldn't start everything. Now, excess projects create other types of waste. So the waste of motion, again, on a factory floor might be extra reaching, walking, stretching, twisting. But the motion of people shows up in product development and other knowledge-based areas in a whole bunch of different ways. One of the most common and actually most elusive to solve is task switching. If I have 10 projects and I keep switching tasks between them, instead of 2 where I can focus for longer periods, I have to undo the work on one, start doing work on the other, and every time I task switch, there's extra motion, extra steps for the individual to go through. And that's a very elusive and sometimes difficult to observe, but is a very real waste in all sorts of knowledge work. The waste of waiting is anytime material or people are waiting for something to happen, waiting for a piece of equipment, waiting for a person. In product development, most of the time it's waiting for information. Information from marketing, information from the laboratory, information from a customer. And so finding ways to make better connections between resources to speed up those handoffs can reduce that waste of waiting a great deal. The next 2 wastes are the waste of overproduction and overprocessing. The waste of overproduction is producing too much or producing it sooner. The waste of overprocessing is producing more than the customer requires. A good example of understanding the difference is if you go to a restaurant for breakfast. Overproduction is they give you a 3-egg omelet when you really only wanted 2, or the omelet's ready way before the rest of the food is. Overprocessing is putting in a bunch of ingredients into that omelet that the customer doesn't want and then scrapes out before they begin to eat it. So again, in product development, overproduction might be making decisions too early. There might be more things to learn in the market, feasibility studies to do, comparisons between designs, and when we lock into a design or a concept too early, we actually limit our ability to achieve optimal design. Overprocessing is over-designing beyond the need. So doing something beyond what the customer needs, just because us as engineers or designers know we can or want to achieve it, doesn't mean the customer wants it, wants to wait for you to design it, or wants to pay for it. The last waste is the waste of defects. Again, in manufacturing, this is scrap or reworked material. But in product development, it might show up as something like incomplete design cycles. And one example, I was working with an organization where as they went into design, they knew they would have multiple cycles. So the engineers didn't feel that they had to get all the specs completed for prototype number A, letter A, because they knew there would be a B. And so the whole design cycle of A turned out to be a waste because not everything was ready and it was really an incomplete test. So that's an example of an incomplete design cycle, which is a defect within the process. Use these 7 wastes as a lens and language to find opportunities. And then again, the behavior is to identify and eliminate. And that once we find the waste, we are compelled to act, either individually or as an organization. As we drive waste out of the organization, it's not just about reducing costs. It's about freeing up time and resources to invest into the future of the organization.